Shepherds in the fields abiding, watching o'er your flocks by night. God with man is now residing. That is the message of this season. We're not talking about a person born like Charles Dickens would have us believe. Now, you know what I think of Charles Dickens, at least as far as the deity of Christ is concerned. But Charles Dickens' idea was that this good baby was going to be born and he was going to become the Son of God by being such a good little boy. No. God with man is now residing. He started out as God. The moment he was conceived, he was God from before. Well, this morning, I wanted to take this Thanksgiving time to preach one message on the idea of the giving of thanks. What we just read here in 1 Chronicles was on the occasion of the ark being returned. And David was excited and he was thrilled that the ark was back where it belonged, or on its way back at least. And he appoints special people, think about this, whose job it is just to give thanks. Our sermon title this morning, Thankful for the Command to be Thankful. We could have another title, perhaps, and that title could be in the form of a question. Is Thanksgiving optional? I'm not talking about the day necessarily or the holiday. I'm talking about the attitude and the action of giving thanks. Is that optional? Or is that something we need to do? As I was thinking about this week, not to get philosophical on you right straight out of the chute necessarily, but I was thinking about whether or not society is even possible without gratitude. Is social interaction possible without being thankful? Now here in, I would hope, this part of Pennsylvania, we have gratitude built into the way we do things. We say thank you very, very easily. Two people pull up to a four-way stop sign together, they look at each other, and one says, go ahead. And what does the other one usually do? Just a quick wave. What's the quick wave? It's a way of saying thank you, is it not? Now, if you lived in a society where might makes right, and the only reason why we do anything is because we're forced to. Now, there are societies like that. There are societies where no one actually does anything for their neighbor out of love for their neighbor and love for Christ because their living situation is so desperate, all they can do is the bare minimum for everything. A society like that doesn't have room for being thankful. Think about it in your marriage. Can your marriage survive without gratitude? I haven't thought this through entirely, but I think the answer is no. Your marriage, your family is your first society. Try surviving your first society there, your marriage, without gratitude. Try to imagine that. Hopefully you can't. When we go to the wider society, though, I just don't see how we can interact without gratitude, exchange between peoples. Otherwise, I just do everything. I'm never really thankful. You just did what you did because you had to. Someone else was making it. You have no overflowing of goodness because you love God and because you love your neighbor. You don't have that. You just do it because somebody has a gun to your head somewhere. I haven't thought this through entirely, but I thought about it this week, and as I was preparing this sermon, let us give thanks to God continually, says John Chrysostom, for it is outrageous that when we enjoy his benefaction to us indeed every single day, we do not acknowledge the favor with so much as a word. And this, when the acknowledgement confers great benefit on us. He does not need anything of ours, but we stand in need of all things from him. He goes on to say, thanksgiving adds nothing to him, but it brings us closer to him. For if when we recall the benefactions of men, we are the more warmed by affections for them. And there's Chrysostom, kind of zeroing in on what we're talking about here. Are we not, as grateful people, or as we should be grateful people, when someone does us a favor, when someone goes out of their way to be good to us, out of their way, are we not warmed in our affections for them? We should be. If we're not, then we're saying that they owe us. And that's dangerous. Entitlement, the entitlement attitude is crushing our families and our nation. It's crushing us. And it's based on a lack of gratitude. That's at the base of it, as Chrysostom tells us. Much more, when we continually bring to mind the benefits of the Master towards us, shall we be more earnest with regard to his commandments. Are we grateful for his commandments? You know, the passage that we just read, which we don't have time to exegete, shall we say, this morning, but the passage that we just read talks extensively about all the aspects of God and being thankful for them. Even the aspect of coming to judge the earth. Judge, oh yeah, that terrible word in the English language today. But here we see in Chronicles, it's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. God's judgments is wonderful. My friends, somebody's judgments are going to come down. I would hope we would be pleading for God's judgments, because we know what man's judgments look like. Horrific and terrible. Well, our passage this morning, if you'll turn to it with me, Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians 5. Paul here uses the term being thankful or giving of thanks in a way that may surprise us here at first. But what we want to do is we want to pull this out of the passage and see how it actually makes an awful lot of sense for us here today. Ephesians 5, therefore, be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us as an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be named among you as is fitting for saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolishness, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not be partakers with them. We said in our title, thankful for the command to be thankful. Thankful for the command to be thankful. We should be thankful for that command. A command to be thankful. We should be thankful for all of God's commands. Think of this in the very beginning, the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Is that not a wonderful command? Why would you break his commands, the second one as well, no graven images? Why would you want to bow before a stick of wood or a piece of metal when that piece of metal or that stick of wood could never have gotten you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage? Couldn't do it? Are we supposed to have the option? I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I give you the option of bowing before a piece of wood or a stone. No. We're grateful for his command that we don't bow before these things. And we're grateful this morning, as I hope to communicate, for his command, as we see right here, the giving of thanks. And so I have 5 reasons this morning and an application, all from this passage, to exercise thankfulness. I believe that the commands are there, the reasons are there, and in verses 6 and 7, if you will, we actually have the application. So we have a miniature sermon here in verses 1 through 7 here in Ephesians chapter 5. My 5 reasons to exercise thankfulness. Number 1, it is a recognition of dependence on God. It's a recognition of dependence on God. Number 2, it is a necessary aspect of walking in love. A necessary aspect of walking in love. Number 3, it is a barrier to doing wrong things. A barrier, thankfulness, is a barrier to doing wrong things. Number 4, it is a barrier to saying wrong things. A barrier to saying wrong things. And number 5, it is a barrier to being the wrong person. Say, giving of thanks. Being thankful has all those benefits. Well, I hope to demonstrate that in the time that we have remaining here this morning. Seems a little simplistic, doesn't it? Almost too simplistic. If I don't want to be the wrong person and say the wrong things, do the wrong things, you mean all I have to do is be thankful? Well, I don't think the passage is telling us that necessarily, but it is telling us that being thankful will have these benefits. Let's take a look. First of all, Paul says, be imitators of God as dear children, walk in love. Well, you know what? Anybody can agree with that. I can tell you that much right now. Any liberal, pagan pastor with his rainbow hanging outside can agree with this. Walk in love, everybody. But what's it mean? What's it look like? It's intriguing that Paul here, it's mostly a negative passage. It's mostly saying this is what you don't do. This is what you better not do. There's very little positive commands here. The walk in love is a positive command, but what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, let's see. Walk in love as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. And here we have the beginning of the idea of the thanks here. Walk in love, be imitators of Christ. Christ did something for you that you could not do yourself. This is the basis of thanksgiving in any societal situation, is it not? We say thanks to someone often because they did something for us that we couldn't do for ourselves, or it was convenient. Maybe we could do it for ourselves, but it was inconvenient or whatever. This is, again, how we depend on each other. This is, again, how we even have a society for even interacting. People do things for us, and I trust for them as well, perhaps that they can't do for themselves. That's the basis of good business, is it not? Is that not why people are in business? People are in business because they're doing things that have to be done, but the people themselves can't do it for one reason or another. So, we see the beginning of this idea of thankfulness right here. Christ did something. Christ did something for us we could never have done for ourselves, but needed to be done. Had to be done. Christ did it. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you as is fitting for saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. Now, does that seem a little bit odd to you right there? Don't do all these things. Don't talk this way. Don't be this way. Instead, be thankful. Does that sound a little bit like what that's doing there? Well, let's see. First of all, that really is, besides the walking in love in verse 2, this really is the only active verb that we have in the passage. We have Paul with a litany, if you will, a list of horrible things that people do and say and are. And one active verb pretty much in the middle of it, just one: giving of thanks. And he's doing it in he's not saying also like, oh, be thankful, by the way. He's saying, but rather, but instead of, trade all this wicked behavior in for giving of thanks. And it seems to me he's saying, if you are thankful, you will not have these kinds of problems. Let's see the first one. It is a recognition of dependence on God, as we see right here in the beginning. Be imitators of God as dear children. Imitate God as dear children. Can you recognize your dependence on God without being thankful? Do you think that's possible? I don't think it can be done at all. You can depend on God and not be thankful? My friends, I hope we're thankful for those that we depend on even here in this life. I'm intrigued that Paul says, be imitators of God as dear children. Now, he's not saying go back and be a child, but what he's saying is this: children, as children, they may not recognize their dependence on God, but as they grow, they look back and hopefully trust that they do recognize their dependence on their parents as dear children. One thing you better recognize when you grow up is that if you didn't have parents who took care of you, you'd be doornail dead. You wouldn't even be alive at all. I think that's what Paul's getting at here. Be imitators of God as dear children. Recognize here your dependence on God, which later on he's going to tell us be thankful. So number one, then, it is a recognition of dependence on God, thankfulness. Number two, it is a necessary aspect of walking in love. Verse 2, and walk in love as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us as an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. And we don't have time to go into that, but Paul there is recognizing the sacrifices that are laid out in the Old Testament. And God said again and again, there are certain types of sacrifices that actually are a sweet-smelling aroma to me. I don't know how all that works exactly, but God said, he said, these sacrifices, they're sweet. They're sweet to me. Do we not recognize that when we say thanks, we're recognizing perhaps some small sacrifice that someone else is making for us? Maybe they picked something up off the floor. Maybe they did something big for us. Do we recognize the idea of connecting sacrifice with thanksgiving? There were certain sacrifices in the Old Testament that were thank offerings that were presented. There's a connection between sacrificing and thankfulness, which demonstrates walking in love, a necessary aspect of walking in love. Number three, a barrier to doing wrong things. But fornication, verse 3, and all uncleanness, doing wrong things, or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints. What's up with this fornication, uncleanness, and covetousness, and so forth? What's up with that? You know what I believe is a big part of that? a lack of gratitude, a lack of thankfulness for my own station in life. And I have to go and have to desire my neighbor's stuff and think of ways to get it from him. You know what? I don't see how you can be covetous and lustful and thankful at the same time. Trade in, Paul says, your lust, your covetousness, trade that in for being thankful and grateful for what God has given you now. Do that. You know, desiring what our neighbor has and coming up with ways to get it, devious ways to get it, is a definite slap in the face of the God who has blessed you richly already. Is that not the problem, which we don't have time to look at this morning? Is that not the problem that Eve faced along with Adam there in the garden? God's holding out on you. He's not telling you everything. You deserve more from God. Covetousness, idolatry, wickedness. Give it up. Give it up and start being thankful. Number 4, it is a barrier to saying wrong things. Verse 4, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather there are giving of thanks. Yeah, Paul is definitely saying, and here he's talking about talking, is he not? Foolish talking, coarse jesting, and so forth. He is definitely saying, he's talking about how you use your mouth. That's what he's talking about. And he's saying, give up this foolish talking, this nonsense you're talking about. If you've ever been around unbelieving men, especially when they get drunk, you know what this is talking about right here. You know it. Don't experience it just to experience it. You can do without it, trust me. But I've been around men like that. I've been around men who are just coarse, and it's foolish, and they're mocking, and they're making jokes about each other's wives. It's wicked stuff. But you know what I don't hear when I'm around those guys? You know what I definitely don't hear? I don't hear any thanksgiving at all. Don't hear that. Not even a little bit. Are you seeing the benefits of being thankful here from this passage? I hope you are. I hope you are. Number 5, then, it is a barrier to being the wrong person. For you know, verse 5, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Now we come across these kind of verses in the scriptures from time to time, and they're the kind of verses you just make a stop for a second. Stop. And we should look at this and say, you know what? I do not want to be that. I don't want to be a fornicator. I don't want to be an unclean person. I don't want to be covetous or idolatrous. I don't want to be any of that. Because those people don't have any inheritance in the kingdom of God. And it doesn't matter if you had a little experience at some point. Where are you now? You know, as I studied this verse this week, I couldn't help but think of those dear people that are pushing lust. Yes, I'm talking about the polygamy people. You know, I've challenged some of them online. I've challenged them to tell me if relations with an unmarried woman, let's say you have a man who's married, and I've asked them if relations with an unmarried woman is adultery. And you know what? They're having trouble with that. They are having real trouble with that. Well, it's definite fornication if it's nothing else. They're even having trouble with that. They're having trouble figuring that out. I would urge all of them to figure that out now, because we have it right here. If you're a fornicator, you have no inheritance in the kingdom of God. I don't care what kind of fancy little arguments you come up with about how it's okay to have relations with people who are with women who are not your wife. Fornicators, says Paul, are not going to inherit the kingdom. Not that I like talking about it, but of course we can't look at a passage like this without mentioning that horrific and damaging activity, that destroyer of marriages and destroyer of people, pornography. It's a horror, and it's right here. It's right here. That's what this is talking about here. Not just talking about, but it's definitely talking about that. Put that away from you. I don't see how. Again, if you observe that activity, I don't see how you can be thankful for what God has given you at the same time. I don't see how you can do it. Because you're lusting after something that doesn't belong to you, and you can't lust after something that doesn't belong to you without saying to God at the same time, what you gave me isn't good enough. I deserve better. Well, how do we apply what we've heard here this morning? The great benefit of being thankful, a recognition or benefits, a recognition of dependence on God, a necessary aspect of walking in love, a barrier to doing wrong things, saying wrong things, and being the wrong person, a barrier. Well, how do we apply this? Spurgeon says this: has the Lord been gracious to you and inclined his ear to the voice of your prayer? Then thank him as long as you live. Let the ripe fruit fall upon the fertile soil from which it drew its life. Do not fail to sing in praise of him who has answered your prayer and has given you the desire of your heart. To be silent about God's mercies is to incur the guilt of ingratitude. It is to act as poorly as the 9 lepers who, after they had been cured of their leprosy, did not return to give thanks to the healing Lord. And you remember the case. 10 lepers come to Christ. Only one comes back to thank him. And Spurgeon says that is a sin there of ingratitude. Well, I think our application is right here in verses 6 and 7. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them. That whole partakers thing is going to show up a little bit later on in the chapter, again, which we don't have time to look at here this morning. What's our benefit here? What's our application? Are you in danger of being deceived by empty words? You know what I think Paul's referring to here? I think he's going back to the Garden of Eden. Now, forgive me, as your pastor, you know I can hardly read any passage without seeing the Garden of Eden somewhere in there. But talk about being deceived by empty words. You know, if Eve and Adam, if they would have been grateful, think about it, for all that God, they set them in the Garden of Eden, set them with trees. I mean, they didn't even plant the trees. And as we've said before, the way to really eat quickly is trees with fruit on it, right? Because when Adam gets thrown out, he has to now plant in fields and fight thorns. I mean, you're planting in fields, now it takes a little bit of time to get your food. You got to do a lot of work. But when you're just in the garden with lots of trees and lots of fruit, you didn't do any work except maybe pick the fruit off the trees. That's your work. Where's the gratitude, Adam and Eve? Where is it? Deceived by empty words. I think our application is here this morning. The more we are thankful for what our God through Christ has done for us, the less we will be deceived by empty words. How thankful are you this morning? How grateful are you? Do you thank God for his goodness and his mercy? Oh, I'm afraid I don't, not like I should. I think of things that have happened to people that I've known, and I consider the blessings which God has blessed me with, all due to his grace alone. I really should be thanking him every waking moment. I really should be thanking him all the time. Well, I can't. I don't do that. I trust one day I will thank him like I should. I trust. But I challenge you this morning. Be thankful. The benefits are wonderful, as we saw here in Ephesians chapter 5. Shall we pray?